what happened with midwives and stuff? Did you end up turning her in, or was she already getting investigated, or how did that go down?
Well, she was licensed by the state of Texas. So she was licensed to home birth. It's not illegal to do home births in Texas. She was a CNM. No, CMP. CNP. I can't remember these, but CPM. There we go. She was a CPM, not a CNM. So certified professional midwife. And then she was licensed by the state. So in Texas, the governing body over her, since there's no nursing board, she's not a nurse, is the Texas Department of Health. The same people that oversee daycares, they oversee them. But turns out that they have their own board, a midwifery board under this umbrella. And that board consists of like a few midwives, one OB, and a member of the just regular people that's not in the birth profession, but I'm sure that person is probably friends with. And they're all buddy. And there's another group, I don't remember what it's called now. I don't even know if it's still around in Austin. I haven't been in that state for so many years, but another midwifery organization there, Faith, my midwife, was one of the people on that board. So a big person in that. People on that board are also on this midwifery board. So she is absolutely 100% professionally involved and friends with the people on the board. The one OB recused herself because I submitted a complaint, because that was the only thing I could do. So I found out the only thing I could do is I could submit a complaint to this midwifery board. And I did that. And the OB recused herself from hearing my case because I had called her office to get the 6-week postpartum check. By 6 weeks, I realized something was very bad with my provider, and I did not want to go back to her. But I did want to get a 6-week check because I wanted to make sure I was healthy enough to have another baby. I wanted to get pregnant again. I wanted the baby. And I called this OB who was supposed to be midwife friendly, because I'm like, I don't want to go into just a random OB who's going to be like, well, yeah, you had a home birth, stupid. That's what, that was terrified of that happening. Like, I just couldn't handle it because I felt horrible and guilty. And the last thing I needed was to have a doctor tell me, yeah, you're an idiot, because I was beating myself up way worse than, I just didn't need anybody adding to that. So I called this midwife friendly OB to ask if I could do my postpartum there. And they told me no, because she hadn't been my OB, she would not see me. And they said also, because she's on the midwifery board, she can't see you because it'd be a conflict of interest. So I never saw her. But when my case came up, she recused herself. She said, that professionally she didn't feel comfortable hearing it because I had called her office. Did they find another OB? No, they did not. So there was no obstetrician on the board to hear my case. It was just midwives and this layperson. A whole bunch of people showed up that day from the birth community, and all in support of the midwives. They were booing and hissing while I was crying and trying to tell my story, arguing, saying that's not what happened, and stuff like that. People who weren't at my birth have the nerve to argue me as I'm trying to explain this. The lady on the board told me, babies die in the hospital too, when I was telling her story. I said, yes, I know babies die in the hospital. Does that mean I should not, try to have this looked into as to why my baby died? I think it was my provider's fault, and I want that looked into. They just slapped her on the hand. They gave her a 6 months probated suspension, which meant she couldn't practice alone for 6 months. So she had to have another midwife there. Did not have to be someone above her. She could she could continue teaching. Like, she was teaching so that the student could be another midwife, that would count. And what she did with that 6 months was she decided to go to Africa, to Kenya, for 6 months and deliver babies in Kenya for her time, and then came back when her time was over and opened a birth center and made like $10,000 a month. I mean, it was an insane amount of money how much they were charging and how many births they were doing for that next 18 months. I was flabbergasted at how many people were seeing this midwife. And I was very vocal. That is not something that happens a lot. A lot of the moms I met don't have the energy. It's because I'll tell you what, the flack you get is a lot. I mean, I consider myself a very strong person, but it was absolutely wore me down. And but I felt like I couldn't not, because I didn't know that babies that were healthy would die because of home birth. And I felt like, because I didn't know that I could not bear to know that there might be somebody that I interacted with that would go on to have a home birth and have this happen and be able to say that. Like, I'm like, you hear my story and you want to go, la la la, I don't believe you. That's one thing. Fine. But I cannot be silent and know that you tell me one day crying, I didn't know this could happen. Wait, how did you not tell me this happened to you? I didn't know. I didn't want to be that. So I was very vocal about what happened to me, who my midwife was, any avenue to get my story out there. I spent the next 2 years heavily investing all extra energy I had to putting it out there, because I was like, this will not be in vain. Like, my daughter's not going to die and not mean anything. Like, I don't want this to happen to anybody else. Like, I know that other people are going to lose their babies, but I don't want anyone else that possibly could have heard my story to have that happen. You know, like, if my story can stop one person from making a choice where their baby would die, then that's worth it to me. And so that's worth all this hardship to tell my story and have people hate me and say ugly things about me, and it feeling like ripping open a Band-Aid every single time I have to talk to somebody about it, or have an argument with somebody about it, or be asked questions about it. And yeah,
No, it's hard. And you're right. Unfortunately, there is a lot of us. There is so many of us, but not many of us are actually very outspoken about it. A lot of people don't want to share about it. It's a lot. It's a lot. And our own communities, look what they do to us. And then sharing online, we're going to get all all the rabid freaking followers are going to come find us too. So it's like, it's a lot to go through of this stuff and the personal attacks. Like, I totally get this.
you
So
literally can't even say, like, my baby died at a home birth when somebody's saying, what's your advice? I want to have twins. Both are breech and I want to do it unassisted. What do you think? And you say, well, my baby died at a home birth. Here's my story. That comment will get followed by 50 people telling you that's not appropriate. Why are you fear mongering her? Oh yeah, you're the liar who said this. And I mean, just like going out of their way to just attack you for just flat out saying a fact. My baby died at a home birth. It's just a fact. It's a fact. There's no opinions in that. My baby did die and it was at a home birth. And here's my story, and that'll get you attacked.
You were down there in Texas. How did the community around you, because obviously we become in a physical community when we're in the natural world, how did they react when you started like being like, this happened to my baby died? Like, how did that community right there physically, how did they treat you?
Oh, well, starting from, I realized as soon as I walked into that room where the hearing was, I saw people I knew that wouldn't look at me, wouldn't talk to me. I'm like, oh, and I was very heavily involved in the community. Like, I went to lots of like natural parenting groups and like breastfeeding groups, and all these people. It's all a lot of the same people. There's new people that come in, but a lot of the regulars are there. And I realized I am not going to make any friends. There is not going to be. If these people aren't close friends with me, they're not going to be my friends anymore. They're not going to want anything to do with me. I was not part of anything anymore. I mean, I ended up moving. I moved when, let's see, in 2011. She was born at the end of 2009. I moved less than 2 years later. I could not be there anymore. I couldn't go to any mommy groups or anything like that. I couldn't stand driving so many places reminding me of so many things relating to my birth and her death, and this midwife, that it was just all negative all the time. And I needed a change. I can't take it anymore. Like, I can't be surrounded by these bad memories and the inability to make friends. And, it's oppressive. I can't be here anymore. So I left, never went back. I mean, I've visited and eaten food and see certain people, but I'm certainly not part of the community there anymore.
Did you ever try to get an attorney with all this?
I did. I called every attorney that I could. They wouldn't take my case because in Texas, if a baby doesn't take a breath, then they're not considered alive. Like you don't get a death certificate, or you don't get a birth certificate. You just get a death certificate, and they can't file wrongful death because the baby never took a breath, so there's no money in it. And of course, she didn't have help. She didn't have professional insurance. But still, they could have sued her for her own assets had she had the state law allowed it. But it would have been such a small amount that it wouldn't be worth any attorney taking it on, because they'll only take it on when they can have the potential of making some money. So I was not able to get a lawyer to take my case.
Did you get any support through any of this stuff after you lost your daughter, you or your family?
I think, I mean, I had some friends that were very close and very supportive for sure. I found a new circle of friends like online that were very supportive. My mom was very supportive because she had lost a baby from an abruption. So hers was in the hospital, but it was more of it was during a hurricane and it was like a full abruption, and there was nothing they could do before the baby had died. It wasn't exactly my same scenario, but she knew she was able to be supportive of that. As far as like the other side, like my then husband's family, they were not very supportive. His mother thought, well, if you would have just used my friend for a midwife, that never would have happened. Like the friend that assaulted me, and she felt like it was very stressful for my then husband. He ended up in the ER when I was up there with a migraine. Like they ended up giving him like shots of morphine because he couldn't see. Like he had that a stress response. He was so stressed out, and they came and collected him from the hospital and took him home and like babied him. So I was like alone. I was with my doula, but I was processing my daughter had died alone because my husband was getting babied by his family. So we're not married anymore, by the way. They were not supportive then. They continued to not be supportive. Like when we got pregnant with our next baby, they said I was selfish for putting him through the stress of losing baby and then wanting to have another one, and not supportive at all. But I had friends that were supportive. So there was that.
I'm not sure if you've ever experienced this, but this is something that I've noticed within the home birth community, is that, or even just the out of hospital birth community, people who choose to deliver, whether they free birth, whether they home birth with a midwife, go to a birth center that's not attached to a hospital, whatever, where they'll kind of like remain boisterous and bold on social media in the comments section for a couple months and tell you like how you're wrong, how that midwife, I delivered with that midwife and she was amazing, she was amazing, she was amazing. And then after a couple months, they'll reach out to you personally and be like, now that I'm thinking about it, it wasn't. Now that because I remained friendly with her after the birth of my child, I'm now talking to more people who've delivered with her. And none of us really feel like we got the care that we expected or the care that we were promised. And that's something that happens a lot too, that I don't think almost anybody is talking about, is the people who do experience trauma with it, but it takes so long for the trauma to become realized by them that they don't speak about it, because then they're like, why am I complaining about the birth of my 3-year-old child?
Right.
When it's been 3 years.
Right. Yeah.
It's like a temporary, being temporarily disillusioned and then all of a sudden coming into reality.
Right. Yeah. I've seen people that have had that happen, not as personally like somebody personally said, no, I love that midwife, you're wrong, and then came back to me and said, you're right, I've had people tell me, so I thought I had a great home birth with a different midwife, but now I realize that this really scary thing happened. Or I think of, right offhand, I think of two people, both that I know personally, in person people that had home births that would be considered successful home births. The baby was alive, they had the birth they wanted, except for later it turns out they both had fistulas that they tore internally, and you don't realize weeks/months later that their entire pelvic floor is ruined, and they end up having to have surgeries later, or can't have sex later. For the two women that I'm thinking of, it took months before they really realized that this happened because of it being a home birth and not in a hospital, that this never would have happened in the hospital, that I basically birthed like a sub-Saharan African woman with no help, because that's what my body is like now, is like someone in Africa who doesn't have health care, and it's that's a scary realization, to realize you paid $4,000 for somebody to let you be, have your pelvic floor ruined.
I do want to explain what fistulas are and how they happen during childbirth. I don't know if people know what bed sores are, but they're pressure sores. Basically, you have a weight pressing on soft tissue and it cuts the circulation off. Now, inside your pelvis, you've got a whole lot of soft tissue. You've got your colon, your vagina, all of that's very soft tissue. And if labor is slow or obstructed, then the baby's head, which is big ball of bone, is pressing on that soft tissue for sometimes hours and hours. And as the circulation dwindles or cuts off entirely, that tissue basically dies for lack of blood supply. So after the birth, the baby passes through, but that tissue is either damaged, dead, or very fragile, and it breaks up, and you end up with a hole internally in various portions of your soft tissue. Usually it's your vagina and associated tissues, but can go all the way through your colon too, and cause fecal leakage, urinary leakage, and the only way to fix it is surgery. Mm-hmm. And it's tricky surgery too. It's not easy. And the reason we see that in areas with very poor access to healthcare is because in places with more advanced obstetrics available, if your labor slows down too much, they'll say, we don't think this is working. We'd like to do a C-section. And they'll explain why. And they probably won't use the word fistula. They'll just say that a vaginal birth is not in the cards. It's not happening. And then they do a C-section, baby comes out the other way, and all of that tender tissue remains intact. But if you just keep, what is it they call it? Oh, midwifery likes to say, failure to wait. Well, if you wait too long, you can end up with a fistula. You can get a baby to come out one way or another, but you can end up with permanent damage to your parts. And it's also tricky because if you end up with severe tears or a fistula and you have and become pregnant again, you may be advised to have another C-section to avoid damaging those tissues again. So it's definitely not something you want to happen to you, and you want to avoid it. And if the way to avoid it is to have a C-section, then you should definitely consider that a good thing, not a bad thing.
I've had the same right here in Vegas too. Even my friends that I was in the community with, we had our babies together. They had their baby, like the one had her son a few months before I was having Gavin. And same thing, she tore so bad and never talked about it, because you're not allowed to talk about the bad stuff in the community. It's only good. It's only rainbows. It's only butterflies. It's, it's just this amazing experience. And so it wasn't until afterwards when she met with me and I was telling her what happened and we were going over stuff. And at the time I was still a little bit in shock. So I didn't even know everything that had happened, but I just was telling her like what she told me, what happened, like what I could kind of kind of piece together. And then that's when she was like, so this is what happened to me, my first. And, you know, and I was like, why aren't you telling anybody this? Like, why aren't we speaking about this? And she just was like, I didn't want to get thrown out of the community. And I was like, but this happened to you. Like, this is a horrible traumatic experience that happened to you. And you're one of like the picture perfect births of that. Everybody's like, wow, look at, you know, and there's pictures and you're online of like, this is this amazing birth experience, but you experienced birth trauma. Like, you know, and I've noticed a lot since then of like meeting people, especially online. I've met people all over the place that have said the same thing of like, some of them, their kids did live, but their birth trauma is, they try to bury it and then it took a while, or they see stories like ours and then they're like, I can't deny it anymore because I could have ended up in the same thing as you. Like, I've had a lot of people that were very close to my story and their child just happened to live, just got lucky. And you know what I mean? So
yeah, I've had that a lot where people are like, almost, I had the same thing happen. Like, I had an abruption, but my baby lived. I was at the hospital. I've had people that were like, oh, I had an abruption, but my baby just barely lived because we made it to hospital in time, or what. And it's like, but they realize how close they came, you know? And that I'm like, I don't know, that's better than nothing. I mean, it's good to realize how fragile this all is, and that there's no guarantees with birth. I think people think if they follow all the natural birth rules, then there's a guarantee that they're going to have a healthy baby at the end of it. And it's like, no, there's not. Birth does not care. And it's not, you know, so many babies died before modern medicine, and you want to go back to rejecting medicine, then lots of babies and mothers are going to die.